The ships came on a Tuesday morning. They blocked the sun over 6 continents at once. Each vessel was larger than a city, and their shadows fell upon the earth like a death sentence. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe. Now, they had their answer. And it terrified them. The Vren were monsters. That was the only word that fit. They stood 7 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that shifted color in the light. Their eyes were yellow with black slits, like the eyes of a snake. Their hands ended in claws that could cut through steel. When they opened their mouths, rows of sharp teeth gleamed inside. They were predators. Everything about them screamed danger. The militaries of the world prepared for war. Missiles were armed. Soldiers were deployed. Prayers were whispered in every language. But the Vren did not attack. Instead, one ship descended slowly and landed outside the United Nations building in New York. A single figure walked out. She was tall, even for her kind, and she wore armor that looked like it was made from bones. Her name was Cora, and she was the last commander of the Vren Dominion. She did not come to conquer. She came to beg. In the Great Hall, before the leaders of every nation, Cora told her story. Her voice was rough, like stones grinding together, but her words were clear. A plague had come to her people. It attacked their brains, destroying the parts that made them intelligent. Adults died within months of infection. There was no cure. The greatest Vren scientists had tried everything and failed. Their civilization, which had ruled 100 worlds, was dying. But the children were different. Cubs under the age of 10 were immune to the plague. Their young brains could fight off the sickness. They would survive. The problem was simple and terrible. Without adults to teach them, the cubs would grow up wild. They would become animals, driven only by hunger and instinct. The intelligence that had built the Vren Empire would be lost forever. The Vren needed help. They needed someone to raise their young. They had searched the galaxy for a species that could do this. Most were too weak. The cubs would kill them by accident. Others were too cruel. They would abuse the children or turn them into slaves. But humanity was different. Humans were soft, yet they survived. They were weak, yet they protected each other. They raised their children with something the Vren had never understood. They called it love. Cora made her offer. The Vren would leave 3,000 cubs on Earth. Humanity would raise them for 20 cycles, which was about 22 Earth years. In exchange, the Vren would give humanity their technology, ships that could cross the stars, weapons that could defend against any enemy, medicine that could cure diseases humans had fought for centuries, and one more thing, the Vren would never harm Earth. They would leave humanity in peace forever. The debate lasted 3 days. Some leaders wanted to refuse. They feared the cubs would grow up and turn against their caretakers. Others saw opportunity. The technology alone was worth the risk. But in the end, the decision came down to something simpler. Dr. Park Yuna stood up during the final session. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. She was not a politician or a general. She was just a woman who had spent her life wondering about the stars. She asked one question: how many cubs will die if we say no? Cora was silent for a long moment. Then she answered, all of them. The vote passed. Within a month, facilities were built around the world. The cubs were divided into groups of 10 to 20, each assigned to a team of human caretakers. Scientists, teachers, soldiers, and doctors volunteered by the thousands. They did not know what they were getting into. Nobody did. Yuna was sent to a facility in the mountains of Korea. The building was new, built with Vren materials that could withstand anything the cubs might do. Her team was small but dedicated. Kim Do-hyun was a child psychologist who had worked with troubled youth for 20 years. Lee Sora was a former Special Forces officer who had retired after losing her squad in a mission gone wrong. Together, they waited for their cubs to arrive. The transport ship landed on a cold morning. 12 cubs walked out, guided by a Vren handler who looked like he was barely alive. The plague had taken most of his mind already. He would be dead within the week. The cubs were small, only reaching Yuna's waist. But even at this size, they were dangerous. Their claws were fully formed, their teeth were sharp, and their eyes watched the humans with a predator's focus. Yuna felt fear. She would be lying if she said otherwise. But she also felt something else. These were children, scared, confused children, who had been taken from everything they knew and left with strange creatures on a strange world. One cub stood apart from the others. He was smaller, thinner, and his scales were a lighter shade of green. The other cubs ignored him completely. When he tried to move closer to the group, one of the larger cubs pushed him away with a growl. Yuna walked toward him. Her team called out warnings, but she did not stop. She knelt down in front of the small cub and looked into his yellow eyes. He hissed at her. It was a weak sound, more afraid than angry. She smiled. "Hello," she said softly. "My name is Yuna. I am going to take care of you." The cub did not understand her words. Not yet. But something in her voice made him stop hissing. He tilted his head, curious. Yuna reached out her hand slowly, carefully. The cub could have bitten it off. Instead, he sniffed it. Then, very gently, he pressed his head against her palm. In that moment, something changed. Yuna did not know it then, but she had just become a mother. She named him Vek. The first year was hard. The cubs did not understand humans. They did not understand kindness. They only understood strength. And by their measure, humans had none. Feeding time was a battle. The cubs would fight over food, snarling and snapping at each other. The strongest ate first. The weakest got nothing. This was the Vren way. The weak did not deserve to survive. Vek was always the weakest. He was pushed away from every meal. He was bitten when he tried to fight back. Some nights, he went to sleep hungry because the other cubs had taken everything. Do-hyun watched this happen with a heavy heart. He had worked with difficult children before, but nothing had prepared him for this. These were not just troubled kids, they were predators raised in a culture of violence. Changing them would take more than patience. It would take love. He started small. Every night, after the other cubs were asleep, he would bring Vek extra food. At first, Vek was suspicious. In his world, nothing was free. If someone gave you something, they wanted something back. But Do-hyun asked for nothing. He just sat beside Vek and watched him eat. One night, Vek finished his food and looked at Do-hyun with confusion in his eyes. He had learned some human words by then. Enough to ask one question. "Why?" Do-hyun smiled. "Because you were hungry." "But I am weak," Vek said. "Weak ones do not eat." "That is not how we do things," Do-hyun replied. "Here, everyone eats. Strong and weak. Everyone deserves to live." Vek did not understand, but he remembered. Sora had her own challenges. The cubs needed to learn how to fight. Their bodies were built for combat, and denying that would only make them frustrated. But she refused to teach them the Vren way. She would not create killers. Instead, she taught them discipline. She taught them control. She taught them that a true warrior knows when to fight and when to walk away. The cubs resisted. A female cub named Tira was the worst. She was the largest of the group, the strongest, the most aggressive. In the Vren way, she would have been the leader, but Sora did not let her lead. She did not let anyone lead. She treated them all as equals. Tira hated this. One day, she challenged Sora directly. She stood in the middle of the training room and growled, showing her teeth. "Fight me," she demanded. "If you win, I will listen. If you lose, I lead." The other cubs gathered to watch. Even Vek crept closer, curious. Sora was half Tira's size. She had no claws, no fangs, no scales. By every measure, she should have lost. The fight lasted 2 minutes. Tira was fast. But Sora was faster. Tira was strong. But Sora knew where to move. Every time Tira attacked, Sora was already gone. Every time Tira left an opening, Sora struck. She did not use her fists. She used her palms, her elbows, her knees. She hit pressure points that made Tira's limbs go numb. In the end, Tira lay on the floor, gasping for breath. She was not hurt. There was not a single mark on her. But she could not move. Sora knelt beside her. "You are strong," she said. "But strength without control is nothing. Learn to control yourself, and you will be unstoppable." Tira looked up at her with new eyes. "Teach me," she whispered. From that day on, Tira was Sora's best student. The years passed slowly. The cubs grew taller, stronger, smarter. They learned human language. They learned human history. They learned music from a blind teacher named Ojinu, who said that sound was the only thing that mattered. They learned medicine from Dr. Choi Minho, who showed them how to heal instead of hurt. They learned to cook. They learned to build. They learned to create things with their claws instead of just destroying. But the most important lessons were the small ones. A pat on the head when they did well. A gentle word when they were sad. A hug when they were scared. The cubs had never known these things. Vren parents did not show affection. Cubs were trained to be strong, and then sent away. Love was a weakness. Kindness was a trap. Humans taught them different. Vex struggled the most, but he also changed the most. He was still small. He would never be as big as Tira or the others. But he stopped seeing this as a curse. Do-hyun told him stories every night. Stories of human heroes who were not the strongest or the fastest. Heroes who won because they were brave, kind, and clever. "You do not have to be the biggest," Do-hyun told him one night. "You just have to be the best version of yourself." Yuna became Vex's mother. There was no other word for it. She fed him. She cared for him when he was sick. She held him when he woke up from nightmares about his old life. One night, Vec asked her a question that had bothered him for years. "Why did you choose me?" he asked. "On the first day, you came to me. Not the strong ones. Me." "Why?" Yuna thought for a moment. "Because you needed someone," she said. "And I wanted to be that someone. But I was nothing," Vec said. "I am still nothing." Yuna took his face in her hands. His scales were rough against her palms. But she did not care. She looked into his yellow eyes and spoke clearly. "You are everything," she said. "You are my son. And you will do great things. Not because you are big or strong, but because you have a good heart." Vec did not know what to say. He had never heard words like these. He had never felt what he was feeling now. He did not have tear ducts. Vren could not cry. But that night, for the first time, he wished he could. The 20 cycles were almost over. The cubs were grown now. They were adults, tall and powerful, with minds shaped by human hands. They were not Vren anymore. They were not human either. They were something new. And soon, they would have to leave. The Vren ships returned on a clear summer day. They appeared in the sky without warning, just as they had 22 years ago. But this time, humanity did not fear them. This time, they waited with heavy hearts. The cubs had to go home. Across the world, farewell ceremonies were held. Humans and Vren gathered together one last time. There were speeches, gifts, and promises that would never be forgotten. But mostly, there were tears. The cubs could not cry. Their bodies did not allow it. But they had learned to understand what tears meant. They had learned that humans cried when their hearts were full of feelings too big to hold inside. At the mountain facility in Korea, the 12 cubs stood in a line. They were giants now, towering over the humans who had raised them. Tira was the tallest, her scales dark and beautiful. She wore armor that the humans had made for her, decorated with Korean patterns. Sora stood before her. The old soldier's hair was gray now. Her face had more lines than before. But her eyes were still sharp, still strong. "You made me better," Tira said. Her voice was deep, powerful. "You made me a warrior. You made yourself a warrior," Sora replied. "I just showed you the path." Tira knelt down and bowed her head. This was not a Vren gesture. It was something she had learned from the humans. A sign of respect. "I will not forget you," Tira said. "When I close my eyes, I will see your face. When I fight, I will hear your voice. You are my teacher. Forever." Sora placed her hand on Tira's head. Her hand looked so small against those scales. "Go," she whispered. "Make me proud." Do-hyun said goodbye to the cubs he had read stories to. They surrounded him like a wall of green scales and sharp teeth. But their eyes were soft. They were not predators anymore. They were his children. "Remember the stories," he told them. "Remember that strength is not about power. It is about choice. You choose what kind of person you want to be. Nobody else." One by one, they touched his shoulder. A gentle gesture. A promise. Minho said goodbye to the cubs he had taught medicine. They had learned to heal, not hurt. They had learned that saving a life was worth more than taking one. Jinu said goodbye to the cubs who had learned to make music. They would carry his songs to the stars. And Yuna said goodbye to Vek. He stood before her, tall and lean. His scales had darkened with age, but he was still smaller than the others. He always would be. But there was something in his eyes now, a light that had not been there before, a quiet strength that needed no words. "I do not want to go," Vek said softly. "This is my home. You are my family." Yuna reached up and touched his face. Her fingers traced the scales she had known since he was small enough to hold in her arms. "You have to go," she said. "Your people need you. They are dying, Vek. They need what you have learned here. They need hope." "I am not a leader," Vek said. "I am not strong enough. You are stronger than you know." Yuna's voice was firm. "You have something the Vren have never had. You have a heart that cares for others. That is the greatest strength of all." Number 4. Yuna's voice with menaces. Yuna's voice was firm. "You are stronger than you know, Ren." Yuna's voice was firm. "You have a heart that cares for others." Vek was silent for a long moment. Then, he knelt before her, just as Tira had knelt before Sora. He pressed his forehead against her hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything. For choosing me. For loving me. For making me who I am." Yuna's tears fell onto his scales. "You were always special," she said. "You just needed someone to see it." The transport ships landed. The cubs walked toward them slowly, looking back again and again. This was the hardest walk of their lives. Every step took them farther from the only love they had ever known. At the door of the ship, Vek turned one last time. He raised his hand in a human wave. It was awkward. Strange. A predator trying to copy a gesture of peace. Yuna waved back. She smiled through her tears. Then the doors closed, and the ships rose into the sky. The Vren Dominion was not prepared for what came back. Elder Rax was the highest surviving authority. The plague had taken almost everyone above him. He had held the empire together with fear and force, waiting for the cubs to return. He expected young predators. He expected soldiers ready to fight. He expected the Vren way. He did not expect this. The returned, as they would come to be called, walked off the ships in perfect order. They did not fight. They did not compete. They moved together, like a single body with many parts, and they did not bow. Rax stared at them with his dying eyes. The plague had reached him now. He had months left, maybe less, but he was still the leader. He was still the strongest. "Kneel," he commanded. No one knelt. Rax's guards raised their weapons. In the old way, disobedience meant death. The returned should have been afraid. They were not. Vek stepped forward. He was still small, still thin. Rax could have crushed him with one hand. But there was no fear in Vek's eyes, only calm, only certainty. What did the humans do to you? Rax demanded. What weakness did they put in your minds? Vec looked at the elder. He looked at the guards. He looked at the empire that was crumbling around them. Then he spoke, and his voice carried across the landing field. They taught us that there is more than one way to be strong. Behind him, 3,000 Vren stood united. Not as predators, not as prey, as something new. The Vren dominion cracked like glass struck by a stone. The old way and the new way could not live together. Something had to break. Elder Rax refused to accept what he saw. These cubs, these returned, were supposed to save the Empire. They were supposed to become warriors and conquer new worlds. They were supposed to make the Vren strong again. Instead, they wanted to change everything. Tira was the first to act. In the old Dominion, workers were slaves in all but name. They did the hard labor, built the ships, grew the food. They had no voice and no rights. The strong ruled, the weak served. Tira had been strong her whole life. In the old way, she would have become a warlord. She would have taken what she wanted and crushed anyone who stood against her. But Sora had taught her different. 3 months after the returned arrived, Tira walked into a mining colony on the planet Vex. The workers there had not seen sunlight in years. They worked until they died, and then their children took their place. It had been this way for 1,000 generations. Tira stood before them and spoke words no Vren had ever spoken to workers. You matter, she said. Your lives have value. You deserve better. The workers did not believe her. Why would they? Every powerful Vren they had ever known had treated them like animals. But Tira did not leave. She stayed at the colony. She worked beside them. She shared their food and slept in their quarters. Slowly, they began to trust her. When the overseers came to punish her for disrupting production, Tira did not run. She stood her ground. The workers stood with her. This is not the way, the overseer growled. The strong rule. The weak obey. This is how it has always been. Then it is time for a new way. Tira replied. The overseer attacked. He was bigger than Tira, older, more experienced. But Tira had been trained by Sora. She moved like water, striking without being hit. In seconds, the overseer was on the ground. Tira did not kill him. She let him live. Word spread across the Dominion. A returned had defeated an overseer and let him live. A returned was organizing the workers. A returned was teaching them that they had rights. More returned joined her. They went to other colonies, other planets. Everywhere they went, they brought the same message. You matter. You deserve better. You are not alone. Elder Rax watched this happen with growing fury. The plague was eating his mind now. Some days, he could barely think. But he understood one thing clearly. The returned were a threat. They had to be stopped. He called for Vec. The summons came on a cold night. Vec had been working in a hospital, learning how to apply human medical knowledge to Vren bodies. He was not a warrior. He had never wanted to fight, but some battles cannot be avoided. Rax's enforcer was named Gol. He was the largest Vren alive, a mountain of muscle and scales. He had killed more enemies than he could count. In the old way, he was a hero. He was also loyal to Rax without question. Gol found Vec at the hospital. He walked through the doors like a storm, patients scattering before him. The small one, he growled. Rax wants you dead. Your weakness is an insult to our people. Vec stood his ground. His heart was racing, but he kept his voice calm. I am not your enemy, he said. We want the same thing. We want the Vren to survive. We will survive by being strong, Gol said. Not by being soft. Not by copying the humans. Strength did not save us, Vec replied. The plague took the strongest first. Only the children survived. And the children only survived because humans taught them to be more than predators. Gol's eyes narrowed. You talk too much. He attacked. Vec was not a fighter. He had learned from Sora, like all the returned, but he had never been good at combat. He was too small, too slow, too weak. Against Gol, he should have died in seconds, but Vec had something Gol did not understand. He had been taught by humans. He had been loved by Yuna. He had learned that there was more to strength than size and speed. He had learned patience. Gol's first strike missed. Vec was already moving, slipping to the side. The second strike missed too. And the third. Gol was fast for his size, but he was used to enemies who stood and fought. He was not used to someone who refused to play his game. The fight lasted for an hour. Gol attacked again and again. Vec dodged, retreated, and waited. He took some hits. His body ached. Blood dripped from cuts on his arms and legs, but he did not fall. Slowly, Gol began to tire. His attacks became slower. His breathing became heavy. He had never fought so long without landing a killing blow. Finally, he overextended. His balance shifted. His guard dropped. Vec struck. He hit the pressure points Sora had taught him. Gol's limbs went numb. The giant warrior fell to his knees, unable to move. Vec stood over him. In the old way, this was the moment of the kill. The victor proved his strength by ending his enemy's life. Vec reached out his hand. "This is what they taught me," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mercy is not weakness. It is the strength to choose." Gol looked at the offered hand. His whole life, he had been taught that enemies were killed. Mercy was for fools. The strong took what they wanted, but he was not dead. The small one had defeated him and let him live. Slowly, with shaking arms, Gol reached up and took Vec's hand. "Why?" he asked. Vec pulled him to his feet. "Because there has been enough death. Because we need to build something new. And because I believe you can be better than what you were taught to be." Gol was silent for a long moment. Then, for the first time in his life, he bowed his head to someone weaker than himself. "Show me," he said. "Show me this new way." The news spread like fire. Gol, the greatest warrior of the old guard, had joined the returned. Elder Rax's power crumbled. Without Gol to enforce his will, other loyalists began to question. Some joined the returned. Others simply stopped fighting. Within a year, Rax was dead. The plague took him, alone and forgotten. The last symbol of the old way was gone. A new era had begun. 30 years had passed since the cubs left Earth. A generation of humans had grown up hearing stories about the aliens they had raised. Children asked their parents about the Vren. Historians wrote books about the 22 years of guardianship. Some people wondered if they would ever see the returned again. On a quiet morning, a fleet appeared in Earth's sky. Alarms rang across the planet. Defense systems activated. Ships scrambled from their bases. The memory of the first arrival was still fresh in humanity's mind. They had been helpless then. They were not helpless now. Vren technology had made Earth strong. But before a single weapon could fire, a message came through every communication system on the planet. It was broadcast in perfect Korean. "We have come to honor our family." The flagship was called the Yuna. It was the largest ship in the fleet. A great vessel of silver and green that moved through space like a living thing. On its bridge stood High Commander Vec of the New Vren Ascendancy. He was not the small, weak cub anymore. He stood tall now, his scales dark with age, his eyes bright with wisdom. Scars marked his body from battles he had fought, but his posture was not that of a predator. It was the posture of a leader. Calm, confident, kind. Beside him stood the others. Supreme Counselor Tira, who had freed the workers and built a new society. Fleet Admiral Gol, once an enemy, now a brother. And hundreds more, all of them, returned. All of them shaped by human hands. They had come home. Yuna was 94 years old. Her hair was white. Her body was frail. She needed help to walk and could not see very well anymore. But her mind was still sharp, and her heart was still full of love. When she heard the message from the sky, she wept. They brought her to the flagship in a small transport ship. Do-hyun came with her. He was old too, but he refused to let her go alone. Sora had died 5 years ago. Peaceful in her sleep, Minho had passed 3 years before that. Jinwoo, the blind music teacher, had lived to see his 100th birthday before his heart gave out. But Yuna was still here. She had held on, hoping for this day. The doors of the flagship opened. Yuna stepped through, supported by Do-hyun. She looked up at the bridge and saw him. Vec walked toward her. Each step was slow, careful. He was a giant now, a commander of billions, a leader who had changed the course of an entire civilization. But when he reached her, he fell to his knees. "Mother," he said. Yuna touched his face with trembling hands. She traced the scales she had known since he was small enough to fit in her arms. Tears ran down her wrinkled cheeks. "My son," she whispered. "Look at what you have become." Vec closed his eyes. "Everything I am," he said, "I owe to you. To Do-hyun. To Sora. To every human who chose kindness when they could have chosen cruelty." Behind him, the entire bridge crew bowed. 3,000 Vren, once cubs, now commanders, scientists, healers, and builders. They bowed to the old woman who had taught them how to love. Tira stepped forward. She knelt beside Vec, her massive form dwarfing the two humans. "You gave us something our people never had," she said. "You gave us hope. You showed us that strength is not about power. It is about lifting others up." Gol bowed his great head. "I was your enemy once," he said to Yuna. "Now I understand. The humans did not weaken us. They made us complete." Yuna looked at them all. Her vision was blurry, but she could see their shapes. She could see the love in their eyes. She could see what humanity had helped create. "I am so proud of you," she said. "All of you." In the years that followed, the Vren became humanity's greatest allies. Their fleets defended Earth from threats that humans could not face alone. Their scientists worked beside human researchers, combining knowledge to solve problems neither could solve separately. Their doctors healed. Their builders created. Together, they spread across the stars. Other species watched them with wonder and fear. The Vren had once been predators, terrors of the galaxy. Now they were something else. They were protectors. They were healers. They were friends. Some asked how this was possible. How could a race of hunters become a race of guardians? The answer was simple. 22 years of love had changed everything. Yuna died 3 years after the reunion. She passed peacefully, surrounded by her family. Vec was there at the end, holding her hand with his massive claws, careful not to scratch her fragile skin. "Thank you," she whispered with her last breath. "For coming back." "I will always come back," Vec replied. "You taught me what home means." She smiled and closed her eyes. They built a monument for her on the Vren homeworld. A great statue of a human woman, her arms open wide in welcome. Beneath it, words were carved in both human and Vren languages. She saw the predator and chose to love it. She changed the universe with kindness. Bread. When the fording lisses. Every year, on the anniversary of her death, Vren from across the galaxy returned to that statue. They brought flowers from 100 worlds. They told stories of the humans who had raised them. They taught their children about love, and the children listened. The Vren were no longer predators. They were not prey. They were something new, something beautiful, something that could only exist because two species had trusted each other. Vec lived for many more years. He saw the alliance grow stronger. He saw new generations of Vren and humans work together. He saw the galaxy become a better place. On the day he died, his last thought was of Yuna. He remembered her smile. He remembered her touch. He remembered the day she had knelt before a small, scared cub and said, "I am going to take care of you." She had kept her promise. And so had he. The greatest power in the universe is not the ability to destroy. It is the ability to change. It is the ability to look at something broken and make it whole. It is the ability to see a monster and find the person hiding inside. Humanity had taught the Vren this truth, and the Vren would never forget.